The county jail paled in comparison to the Haven. The walls were light yellow, and a layperson would have thought the designs on the walls were art, but they were spells used to inhibit magic. It was so strong that it drifted over my skin and pricked at the tiny hairs on my arm. They didn't need to put rune-decorated cuffs on me to prevent me from doing magic. The room had enough magical wards to prevent the average magic user from performing any. If I were a typical magic user, it would have stopped me, too. Gareth moved in silence as he came behind me and unlocked the handcuffs. Gently I rubbed the red line that had formed from their tightness. As he tossed them on the table, I asked, "I guess you don't consider me dangerous?"
"I'm quite sure you are dangerous, but I don't fear it is to me."
All right, welcome back to OCN Writer's Room. My name is Andre Gilbert, and I'm your host. With us today is Erin Rieman. Rieman. Hi, and welcome to OCN Writer's Room. My name is Andre Gilbert. I am your host, and with us today is Erin Rieman. Only took us 2 takes. So can you go ahead and introduce yourselves? I just can't fucking do this today. Okay.
You already do that, my man.
All right, take 3. Welcome back to OCN Writer's Room. My name is Andre Gilbert. I am your host, and with us today is Erin Rieman.
Hello.
Can you go ahead and introduce yourself, Erin?
Yeah, I am an audiobook narrator. I've been doing it for about 4 years now.
Cool. So tell us a little more about that. What does being an audiobook narrator entail?
It's basically like you're doing 3 movies at once, and you play all of the characters. So you're the narrator, you're the guy, the girl, you're always talking to yourself. I tell people, like, it's a little weird to do because you sit in a small booth and you talk to yourself. So you have to be a little weird to do it, but you get to be super creative. Normally, the authors don't give you any notes on performance, so it's basically all up to you.
And do you ever find that, like, bleeding into your real life? Like, I've definitely worked with some actors before, and we'll just be out in public, and they'll be, like, dry running their lines while waiting for stuff at a checkout counter, and it gets really uncomfortable, like, really fast.
Well, no, because you're not supposed to memorize anything. You're supposed to read through the book once, and then sometimes I'll read a chapter right before to freshen up, but it's really all improv. Like, you're doing it in the moment, and it's supposed to be all coming to you naturally, so you're never supposed to memorize your lines. You're not supposed to really know what's coming next, apart from, like, the,
Sure. So
outline.
How then would you say that, like, audiobook delivery differs from, like, theatrical readings? Like, do you think the fact that you don't have to memorize translates differently to how characters are presented or things are expressed?
Yeah, definitely. I try to do it more naturally. How it used to be was it would kind of sound like they were reading. It wouldn't sound like people having a conversation. They'd use, certain tones, like you lift this word, and I never pay attention to that. I just want it to sound, to me, I want it to be a movie, and as like a movie-like as I can. So if it's narrating, I imagine a sweeping landscape, and they're, introducing the characters, and then it sounds like 2 people just talking, and I want it to be as, fluid and movie-like as it can.
Sure. So can you give us an example of that? Like, just off the top of your head, if you can remember any lines you've done recently, like, how would narrating that differ from how you'd communicate something in a normal conversation?
It's kind of, I can't, off the top of my head, like I said, I don't memorize my lines, but I just did a scene where it's like a girl throws another girl to the ground and starts yelling at her, and I just got angry in the moment, and it's weird at first describing because you're not used to being like, I can't believe you did this, and then she sat in the chair, that takes some time to get used to, but, it helps a lot. It's, you get to be very creative, so.
So have you ever had any of those scenes when, like, that emotional whiplash is really, really jarring? Like, one moment you're just screaming at somebody like, "That's it! I'm done with you!" She walked to the door and closed it behind her.
Yeah, that happens more often than you think. So it's like I have to take a second and pause and breathe, and then, because 2 characters will be having completely different emotions and handling it completely differently, and you have to flip-flop. But luckily you can redo as many takes as you want, so that's very freeing. You never have to worry about getting it perfect the first time, because no one ever does.
Sure. So then I have to ask, and this is one of those, like, industry things that's, like, super intentionally mystique. There's a huge kind of push behind authors doing their own audiobooks, or at least kind of like an expectation for first-time authors. How frequent does that actually happen?
If it's their own memoir, it's pretty common, or if it's nonfiction. But the problem sometimes is it's acting. It is a lot of acting.
Sure.
So if it's a fiction book, can be difficult because they'll sound like they're reading if they're not used to acting or they don't have an acting background. So if they don't have an acting background, we usually discourage it. But if it's their own memoir and they're good at getting into their own emotions and they just want it to be them, it can work really well. It's actually getting more common because it's so easy now to make audiobooks.
For sure. So is that what your background is then, acting? Or
Yeah,
did you originally start planning to do audiobooks or drift into it from a different field?
I kind of just happened upon it. I've always had an acting background. I've always wanted to act. I took acting classes in college and a screenwriting class.
Sure.
So I wrote like a 60-page screenplay just for fun. So yeah, my dad actually got me into it. He did a few audiobooks and then he thought that I should give it a try because it's just voice acting. So he sent me one where the tagline was just sarcastic. I was like, oh, I can do that. So I auditioned for it and I ended up getting it. So I was just thrown in. I had to do a 5-hour audiobook and pretty much learn as I went. So.
Wild.
Yeah.
So when you say 5-hour audiobook, does that mean you're recording for like a solid 5 hours straight? Or do you chop it up and partition it?
I chop it up. It depends how long your voice can hold out for. Mine, I think the longest I've done is 3 hours, but that's a lot of strain. I had to take breaks. Usually I keep it to 2-3 hours a day. And of course it takes longer than 5 hours because you have to redo things, you have to read it. So you're actually in there for probably 10 hours. So it takes weeks to get one audiobook done. So
you mean like you're not intentionally getting those scenes where you're like fighting for air in between paragraph breaks, or?
There was one in my first one where she's supposed to have kind of a sore throat. So I kind of had a sore throat and I just recorded that straight. So it was authentic.
It's what we call method acting in the
Not good
audiobook
for
industry.
you, but
And so one thing that I've seen kind of particularly pop up as a point of discussion in like authenticity in audiobooks is accents. So if you're doing an accent, what does your preparation work for that usually look like?
I had to do a French accent and I took Spanish in high school. So there were French phrases. I just listened to clips of people speaking in English with a French accent for a while. And then I would listen to like clips of the French phrases over and over and over again. But I actually just did one. I was a very strange kid, so I actually just narrated one in an English accent, which I already knew how to do because I would just sit in my room and read out loud in an English accent just because I was weird. I never thought that would come up, but it's been very useful. So
I get that.
So the more accents you know, the better, because there will be books where it's like, I need someone to have a slight Indian accent and this person to have an Irish accent. So it's very needed.
Do you think that there's that same kind of like bleed? One common criticism of television or just acting in general is that like every single non-American accent's a British accent, like a really, really non-specific British accent too. Does that pop up too? Like, say, for example, if you have a Greek character talking, do they sound like they were just raised in London?
No. You can either fake it and do just kind of, you can't place an accent. I've never seen anyone do a British accent where it's not needed. That's just the one that I'm good at. So. That would be a little strange. Yeah, I haven't seen that, but.
Okay. Cool. And so I understand that you've been working on some pretty exciting projects lately. Can you go ahead and run us through what some of your recent works look like?
Yeah, I just finished one called Woodwalker by Emily B. Martin for HarperCollins Publishing. It's a fantasy. You guys should check it out. It's actually really interesting because a lot of it takes place in the forest and they're just running through, and the author was actually a forest ranger, so it has a lot of really cool details.
Sure.
And you can tell that she's really meshed in nature, and so that was really fun. That was probably one of the best ones I've done.
So was there any prep work you did for this novel that separated it from other ones you've worked on?
I always just read through. You're not supposed to do a lot of prep work. In fact, I just watched a webinar on audiobooks, and they said you're not really supposed to mark up your sheet as you would for regular acting unless it's like important and and like really needed, because you're supposed to just be reading the words and just taking them in the moment, and you're supposed to be discovering things. So yeah, it's very freeform.
Cool. So out of all the stuff you've worked on, what audiobooks do you think have like best showcased your talent or creative process?
It's a tough one. I like the one I did in a British accent called Christmas Savior by Joe Michaels. That was fun to do. It was like a vampire angels one. Yeah, or I need to do more comedies because I really like comedies, but I've done mostly dramas so far.
Sure. And then, so you say you want to do more comedies. What would separate a comedy book from a drama book? Or what would you do differently between a comedy book or a drama book besides, being funny?
Yeah, it's not so much emotion as how you know how to say jokes, which I think is really interesting. I think that's harder, for me at least, because I'm very dry. So finding out how to say it as someone else, making it sarcastic, would be a challenge, and I think that would be fun.
Sure. Well, speaking of jokes, actually, and I'm going to offer you a chance to get in on the ground floor of this, there's actually a cryptocurrency circulating called Decibel. And it's kind of unique because regular cryptocurrency, of course, uses this kind of like Sudoku problem solving to mint coins, whereas Decibel actually runs off of audio feedback. So you mine this cryptocurrency by screaming into a microphone. It's a sound investment. Yeah! Got our audio guy to crack up. That's the whole reason I do these jokes.
I thought that was a real thing. I was like, really? I should get in on that.
The dangers
Just
of doing
spend a
stuff
few
dead
hours
pat.
screaming. Yeah.
This is how I make my money, Mom!
There is a little game where you're supposed to jump from building to building, and you do it by yelling into it. And if you're just getting him to walk, you have to go, eh, eh. It's really fun.
Do you find that like actually, so let's actually talk about that for a second, screaming into microphones. Like,
You don't do it. No, you pretend, and you back up. So you'd go here, and you talk louder. And then even when I do that, I always have to do the gain and make it smaller so that it's not so jarring. But yeah, you're not supposed to just scream into the microphone. that would hurt people's ears.
Sure. Well, I meant, do you find doing stuff like that or having to like intentionally modulate your voice in games like that is a useful skill to develop?
Yeah.
Doing audio?
The bigger publishers do the editing for you, but when I first started out, I just did it myself, and that was
Sure.
so I saved a lot of money. And
that.
knowing how to proof it and make sure it sounds nice is very valuable.
So you talked about editing and proofing. So what other skills would you recommend to someone who's interested in getting into audiobooks? Like, what can they learn to make themselves more marketable or competitive?
I'd say listen to a lot of different audiobooks. It's mostly acting, and like I said, as many accents as you can master helps a ton.
Sure.
Because you'll be way ahead of the curve.
Do you find that there's, I mean, of course, picking up accents, specific types of acting that are more useful to pick up, like, say, improv versus, like, character acting versus, like, stand-up?
I think improv always helps, especially in this one. Like, we were talking earlier, I went to Voodoo and just did a random improv thing because it helps you keep you on your feet and keep you in the moment. And it makes acting when you have lines seem a lot easier than when you don't. Yeah, I would definitely
And
recommend
to
that.
clarify for our non-Denver listeners, Voodoo is a comedy kind of bar slash workshop slash playhouse in North Denver. And the open mic nights there are depressing.
Thank you for that. Yeah, appreciate it. They can be fun. Any kind of improv. It's just the one I've gone to.
That's fair.
But yeah, I thought you were going to start talking about acting methods, which I kind of just do my own thing. It's like a mix of my own personal experience with just a ton of imagination.
Sure.
So,
Actually, let's dive into acting methods then, since you brought it up. For those of you that aren't familiar, television and film acting have a couple of different acting methodology schools. There's a couple of big ones like Meisner, Stanislavski. Do you see any of those represented in audiobook narration, or is that generally more of like an on-screen character acting thing?
I think that's more on screen and definitely more theater. Most of the audiobooks I've listened to, they have a certain cadence, which it's up to you if you like listening to that. I like mine sounding, like I said, like movies.
Sure.
So I just put myself in the place of the character, and I think back to if I've gone through anything similar to that, or I just have a very, very clear picture in my head. Like if we're talking about a cave in a forest, I can see the cave and I'm in the cave, and it's like there's rocks and there's moss on this wall, and it's always been like that when I'm reading. So that's helped a lot. I've always had a very distinct voice in my head, so I try to match that.
Sure.
And the guy characters, I try to make them sound like guys. I notice especially a lot of girls, they'll just do like a slight change and make it a bit deeper, but like I go really deep and I want it to sound like you're listening to a guy.
Sure. So, like, in the event that you can't completely mirror or match a character, like, say, for example, you'd have to audio narrate me,
Right.
What tools or methods would you use to get as close to the character as possible without completely like breaking that immersion or without sounding like somebody that's just doing like a party impression?
I focus more on the emotions and as low a register as I can go.
Sure,
You have
sure.
a very deep voice. And I'd probably, if there's a recording of you, which there will be, if you want me to do an impression later, I'll just watch it over and over again.
Stay tuned to watch Erin doing impressions of me in this interview.
Because everyone, just the slightest tweaks, you know, some people go up at the end of sentences, some people talk a little lower, some people have a lot of growl in their voice, just this, because I did a book where there was 27 different characters, and like 10 of them were nurses. So you had to make 10 nurses sound different. So it was just the slightest tweaks that you can. She had like a southern accent a little bit, and this one talked up here, and this one had a bit of a growl to her voice, you know, just as, just the little things.
Sure. Well, then we're just about wrapping up. But before then, if somebody really beyond just like the technical considerations or skills of this, if somebody was really interested in getting into audiobook narration, where would you tell them to start? Or what do you wish you could tell yourself when you were first getting started?
ACX.com is a great resource. It's Audiobook Creation Exchange. Authors post their books and you can audition for them right on there. And they actually listen to your samples themselves and pick you. So especially if you're younger, most narrators when I got into it were in their 50s. So it would be 50-year-old women doing teenagers. So there's a lot for YA if you want to get into it.
Sure. Well, then in your experience, you talked about auditioning a bit. What do you think makes an effective audition?
Read through the piece, learn as much of the book as you can. You don't have to go and read the whole thing, but just looking up summaries of it and what they put. Sometimes the author will put notes of like, this character is very shy and a little bit sarcastic. Just go off of that. And yeah, just I edit it until there's like, make sure it's perfect and sounds nice. And yeah, as long as I'm happy with the characters, I think that's...
Cool. Well, thank you for joining us today, Erin Rieman.
Thank you.
Took us 3 takes to get that last name right.
No one ever says it right. It's German.
So thank you for joining us for another sit down with OCN Writers Room. If you're just hopping into our channel now, we've got a bunch of great material for you. We have our Parental Composure podcast talking about parenting and all things adjacent. We have our Double Take feature, that's twins talking about pop culture, along with a bunch of other exciting stuff. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop us a like and subscribe, share too, so others can enjoy it as well. Once again, my name is Andre Gilbert, and thank you, Erin Rieman, for joining us.
Thank you.